Hi there, it's Paul Palmer here once again with another edition of Rebuilding the Collection, or Junkin' and Jiving with Jazz in Lockdown. In this series of videos, I'm working out which of my earliest jazz albums, which I collected in the form of cassette tapes, should be thrown away, and which should be kept for eternity in digital form. I've recruited friend and former colleague Eric Blachman to help me with this onerous task. And he joins me now from down the line in what I may say is rather attractive surroundings from Houston, Texas. Hi there, Eric.
Hello, Paul. How are you doing today? By the way, this in the background is a long-held dream of mine that's finally been realized.
Well, I suspect some of the viewers and I will own to be rather envious of that. And the fact is, you're sitting outside. We couldn't dream of doing it here because it's 5 degrees, so a bit on the cool side.
If I can speak to the dream, in the background over my shoulder here, you see a 1967 Volkswagen Combi bus, microbus, and way back in the 1980s, I had the VW bus for half a year while finishing up my university degree. And I drove halfway across the country in that bus. And I was woefully ignorant of anything about the bus other than driving it and putting gas or petrol in it. And I put on my bucket list back then that one day I would find out more about the mechanics and proud ownership, responsibilities and practices of being an old Volkswagen owner.
Great. Well, a reminder that we're discussing my cassette collection by album title in alphabetical order, which allows us to discuss different albums from the same artist in different episodes. We did a couple of M's last time, including Miles's My Funny Valentine and the album Michael Brecker. So it's time to get on to the N's. And here they are, 3 albums with N as the starting letter of the title. We've got Thijs Van Leer, Nice to Have Met You, 1978, and that's on the Columbia label. Kent Jordan, No Question About It, 1984, Columbia, also. And then finally we've got Roland Kirk, Now Please Don't You Cry, Beautiful Edith, and that's 1967 on the Verve label. Well, what do you think of the list, Eric? Have you any immediate observations?
My attention goes right to Roland Kirk. I'm not familiar with one of the other two. And my attention goes right back to Raw Sound Roland Kirk, only because way back when I was in high school, I went down to the Village Vanguard and heard him live, and it was a big part of my jazz initiation, with hearing people live and experiencing the atmosphere of that famous jazz institution, the Village Vanguard in New York. So just being in the environment and hearing that was phenomenal. And Ken Jordan, I have a little bit of familiarity with. The third, none.
Yes, I have to admit, and that we'll take the Thijs Van Leer and the Kent Jordan together, because on listening to these again after some possibly 20, 30 years, I was very disappointed. I always come to this project looking at these cassettes and thinking, great, it'd be nice to hear this again. It's lain in this drawer for years and years and years, decades. But on picking up these two and listening to them again, I have to say, quite honestly, I can understand why they've lain in that drawer. In fact, I'm surprised they've even lain there. Let's just take them. Thijs Van Leer, Nice to Have Met You. Well, the artist Thijs Van Leer is a Dutch composer, flute player, and he's quite known for creating a rock group actually called Focus. And I think the evidence of the rock feel and style is very much to the fore in this album, and the evidence of what we would like to see in a jazz album, of swing, of improvisation, it really wasn't there, was it?
No, not in my hearing. No.
No. So I think the very first track kind of sets the standard for the whole thing. It's called My Sweetheart. There's a track called Rosebud, which is slightly more melodic and mellifluous to listen to. But overall, this is not what I call a jazz album. Disappointed. We praised the flute player for what he was able to do with his instrument, but in terms of being a jazz album, it really wasn't. So it was kind of a disappointment, really. And if we move on to the Kent Jordan, Kent Jordan's somebody I know as somebody with genuine jazz credentials. Somebody who is well connected as with relatives in the jazz community. Saxophonist Kid Jordan, it was his father, and he's the older brother of trumpeter Marlon Jordan. Unfortunately, this album is a complete and utter letdown. I think it's his very first venture into commercial jazz, or it's not really jazz. What idiom would you describe this as, Eric?
Well, perhaps either contemporary or contemporary crossover, easy listening, perhaps treading the common ground to a few of those more recent categorizations.
Yes, and somebody, I think it was the composer, French composer Eric Satie, who described certain music as music for furnitures, i.e., not to be listened to seriously, and I think we have a term muzak, which
Yes,
sort of is
exact, yes.
schlock music, which just doesn't have any purpose other than to what's the word, anesthetize you, I suppose. And
Anesthetize, I believe, is a very good word, apt word for some of this, because I suspect there are a lot of people like us out there. It'd be nice to find out through listener comments who would favor that term regarding some of the things that we are binning. I can speak for myself that when I hear hear jazz, I want to be taken on, as a jazz musician, what's of course a more educated journey. I'm listening to the harmonies and the clever, differing ways in which a soloist will negotiate harmony with the backdrop of pulse and rhythm. And these other things, I think, numb me up because, just as you are saying, it's a numbing experience, and certainly we don't want that.
Yes. So if we just briefly, I'll just mention a couple of tracks. California is the first one out, and it really sets the standard of this whole numbing experiences you're talking about. What else does he cover? He covers the theme from Terms of Endearment, a film which was so anemic and I think it was very cheesy as well, and the theme actually goes along with it. I would say about Kent Jordan though, he, as I said, has great jazz credentials in terms of being well connected, and he then put out, after his first two albums on Columbia, this album Essence, which actually started putting it together really in terms of being quality music. On this album, he had performances with Brantford Marsalis, Kevin Eubanks, Marlon Jordan, we've already mentioned, his younger brother, and Ron Carter, and such lovely tracks as Well You Needn't, Moment's Notice, Stella by Starlight, and there you see his awesome sort of jazz technique in his flute playing, and it's just amazing. So
Yes.
I mean, he kind of pulled it around, but those first two Columbia albums, just don't bother with them. So this turns us to Roland Kirk, who's quite an interesting character. Blind from a very early age, Eric, wasn't he? And he attributed that to a medical procedure. And he's a multi-instrumentalist, a fascinating character, able to play 2-3 instruments at the same time. And what he does with these instruments, known for a sort of intoning sounds, clicks, speaking while playing the flute, for example. What do you make of Roland Kirk?
I agree. He's one of these irrepressible characters. Um, Obviously, beyond extremely gifted, musical, um, able to step into any kind of jazz company and exude originality with every next thing he does. This is what I love. Back in the day, I heard a particular tune, I Say a Little Prayer, which I became, of course, familiar with via Aretha Franklin. Um, and there's Roland Kirk harmonizing I Say a Little Prayer and then blowing over its changes, um, and sounding like no one else, not just on saxophone, but stritch, manzello, clarinet, flute. Um, uh, it's in our earlier conversation off camera, you and I were speaking, and I read years and years ago that in an interview back when there were wonderful interviews with jazz musicians in jazz periodicals and journals, that Roland Kirk was speaking to self-effacingly what the critics were saying, and that the critics were saying what he predicted they would say. He'd say, "Yeah, I know what the critics are going to say. They're going to say I play out of tune." And he said, "I do play out of tune when I play a few instruments simultaneously."
Hmm.
Um, but there's the message beyond that, and then as you and I spoke about, when he's either playing just flute or just tenor saxophone, um, boy, he's sounding like he's right there in the great lineage of flute or tenor saxophone in the setting of jazz, and that he belongs there. Not that he's right there, but that he belongs there. Before you even hear his name, if I could have thought that he was Ike Quebec or Coleman Hawkins or someone like that in his rendition of Alfie, for example.
Yes, this is on the track. It's the second track on. It's on this album, and yeah, it's very melodic, melodious, mellow, beautiful, haunting theme, and he plays it with such soul and depth. Uh,
Soul and
uh,
Depth, absolutely. Sonny, Gene Ammons. I mean, just the whole chorale of the big heavyweight players of the earlier time period on tenor saxophone.
mm,
He sounds like several of them wrapped up in one, yet he's his own man, and he's giving us Alfie. And now I'm going to listen to that. I'm determined to now listen to that more often than I've heard Sonny Rollins' version.
so let's also look at some of the other items on there. There's a couple of blues roll. You like that one?
Absolutely.
Swinging the house down, basically.
Absolutely.
And then there's a flute one towards the end of the album, isn't there? Oh, what's it called? I can't quite remember. Is it called Fallout? Let me have a look. Um, no, it's actually called It's a Grand Night for Swinging, and it's just a beautiful flute solo. It's just a blues, and he does all this what I was mentioning earlier, where he's actually singing and playing the flute at the same time. And I should say about the other blues roll, he's playing several saxes, or maybe two or three saxes at once, and on one of them he actually is doing circular breathing, and he plays the whole chorus just with just one note. What more do we know about Roland Kirk?
The albums I first became familiar with were around 1970, 71. Volunteered Slavery, Blackness, um, and it seemed in his presentations down at the Village Vanguard, um, he was um, not shying away from representing as a jazz musician American black music.
Yes, and this led us to. I hope it's not a cul-de-sac, but down a path where we notice a lot of jazz artists. Um, they do a lot of uh, civil rights in their music and their personality, as does Roland Kirk. So you've got Coltrane's Alabama. You've got Mingus, Fables of Phoebus. If I said that right, Fables of Phoebus. You've got who else have you got? You probably can remember one or two
Oh, we spoke
civil
about
rights.
the yeah, yeah, yeah. Quite a lot of them would do this, but even in a subtler way, Duke Ellington was doing this before World War II, um,
Absolutely,
and
and as Nina Simone, of course, in the
Nina
'60s.
Simone, sure, sure.
Um,
Louis Armstrong did it. Louis Armstrong, it didn't gather big headlines, but he refused to go on some State Department tours after some incidents in the United States with civil rights and possibly some further incidents with American behaviors in South Vietnam.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we compared it then to uh, what's going on in Ukraine, and people are talking about uh, being anti-war, and we found that there was a dearth of anti-war uh, sort of protest music in jazz as such. We found that was more the preserve of rock, perhaps, than popular musicians, and we just thought, well, I think you kind of made the point that jazz does a lot of civil rights and anti-slavery and all those kinds of issues, but when it comes to anti-war, it's more silent on the matter. So, isn't it up to jazz to try and redress that balance? Do you think?
Well, I would hope so. Given that we're topical with Rostand and Roland Kirk, there's an album of his. It's either Volunteered Slavery or Blackness. I think it's Blackness. Has a track. He does Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," and so concurrent with his jazz days around 1970, 71, there's the pickup, big time, of the anti-Vietnam War movement, and Marvin Gaye's tune "What's Going On," which is addressing this and wanting to raise consciousness in the United States and throughout the world about what the imperialistic United States was doing in Southeast Asia, or taking up the imperialistic mantle once the French, with the same theme, had collapsed, so on and so forth. And but you have to really look long and hard to find prominent jazz musicians that are stepping beyond civil rights um, into the anti-war arena the way rock and roll would. It seems that my guess is that in the business world, rock and roll promoters and others, um, and this really picked up in the '80s with Live Aid and We Are the World and Quincy Jones and so on and so forth. Um, Promoters obviously got wind that this could be profitable. This
Ah,
was good for rock and roll's image, wasn't it? Globally. I mean, I don't know how many times I've viewed various concerts on YouTube from Wembley, anti-war, and for causes throughout the world. Um,
yes.
and I agree, it seems to be a jazz deficit. By comparison, jazz is.
My one point about that would be that I guess an analogy of if your house is on fire,
Yes.
you won't go down the road fixing up someone else's house. You'll address the issue that you have facing you and confronting you right now. And so, of course, civil rights and oppression and denial of basic humanity, it was something that many African American jazz artists were dealing with, and their supporters. So yeah, but yes, nowadays it's I can't say it's less of a problem because you've got George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and the problems roll on. But so does war, unfortunately. And
I agree, but you could pose the question: should jazz be let off the hook any longer in this era, 50 years later? Should jazz be left off the hook to any degree? Um, I think the sands have shifted under our feet. I mean, here in the state of Texas, in greater Houston area, I find myself teaching topical things in jazz to people that I never would have expected myself to be teaching, and I almost get a little bit embarrassed and reticent to be um, teaching rhythm within pulse and emphasizing it in jazz education, because I remember during my day in high school in America, we all seem to have rhythm. I don't know. I don't know what's happened. I think that the sands have shifted beneath our feet, and it's a wonderful topic to pursue in the near future. Um, After all, if the phrase and the notion out loud of nuclear war is to be bantered about so easily, since the Ukraine uh, episode, which I think is a little bit recklessly irresponsible, um, we should talk about all these things.
yes, there's a lot to talk about on all of these issues. However, we'll maybe pose a few more of these sorts of questions in future videos.
Yes, yes.
You'll have noticed there's nothing here from the 21st century or even the 1990s, obviously, because cassette tapes are very much before the CD era. But since we're looking at artists or albums with names alphabetically from the beginning of the alphabet, let's take a moment, or we should really take a moment to review more modern offerings beginning with ends. However, we've decided to turn this over to our viewers because we've been really rubbish at this bit. I suppose we just don't know enough albums that begin with the relevant letters from this modern era. So if you'd like to give your views on this, please contact us. You can leave a message about the videos underneath the videos in the message section, the comments section, and they'll be read and they will be posted. You can tweet us at collection build or use the hashtag collection build, all one word, or you can contact me directly and my email is collectionbuild@gmail.com. Okay, well, thanks for being with us today. Next time, we will roll on to some new alphabetical offerings. So see you then. My thanks once again very humbly to you, Eric, in those lovely surroundings you've got there. I'm Paul Palmer.